On my 72nd birthday, I received a text message that shattered my world. "You're not invited to our engagement party this weekend. Please don't come." No explanation, no phone call to discuss it. I knew it was from Sophia, my daughter whom I'd raised alone for 26 years after her father walked out when she was 3. We hadn't spoken in 2 months, but I never imagined our relationship had deteriorated to this point. I thought about respecting her wishes, staying home in my small apartment in Willowbrook, letting her celebrate without whatever drama she thought I'd bring. But something deep in my maternal instincts told me this wasn't just about our recent arguments over money, so I went anyway. And what I discovered at the Grandview Estate that Saturday evening didn't just expose the truth about Sophia's fiancé, it revealed a web of deception that had been growing for months. Because what started as a mother-daughter conflict became something far more sinister. And that was only the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The morning of the engagement party, I sat in my tiny kitchen on Elm Street, staring at that text message for what felt like the 1,000th time. My coffee had grown cold hours ago, but I clutched the ceramic mug anyway, needing something solid to anchor me. Outside my window, November rain pelted the glass of my ground-floor apartment, the same modest place I'd moved to after selling the family house to help pay for Sophia's college education. The invitation had arrived 6 weeks earlier, delivered in an elegant ivory envelope with gold embossing. "Mrs. Eleanor Brennan," it read in flowing calligraphy. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of Sophia Marie Brennan and Alexander Vincent Sinclair." The paper felt expensive between my fingers, heavier than anything we could have afforded when Sophia was growing up. I'd been cautiously optimistic about the engagement. Sophia had been secretive about Alexander during their 8-month relationship, always finding excuses when I asked to meet him properly. "He's busy with work, Mom," she'd say. "You'll love him when you get to know him." She'd shown me photos, a handsome man in his early 30s with perfectly styled dark hair and the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never known real hardship. But something about the whole situation had troubled me from the start. Sophia had changed since meeting Alexander. The daughter who used to call me 3 times a week had become distant, evasive. She'd started wearing designer clothes I knew she couldn't afford on her elementary school teacher's salary. When I gently asked about her new expenses, she'd grown defensive. "I'm an adult, Mom. I can manage my own finances." "Of course you can, sweetheart. I just want to make sure you're not getting in over your head. Like you did with Dad's gambling debts." The words had cut deep, referring to the financial mess her father had left us with when he abandoned our family. That conversation had been 2 months ago. Since then, our relationship had grown increasingly strained. Sophia had started avoiding my calls, responding to my texts with curt one-word answers. When she did visit, she seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone and making excuses to leave early. Now, sitting in my small kitchen with rain drumming against the windows, I realized I'd been so focused on not wanting to be the overbearing mother that I'd missed the signs of something much worse. I looked at the clock on my microwave, 3:45 p.m. The party started at 6. Despite the text message, despite everything, I found myself reaching for my navy blue dress, the nicest thing I owned, purchased second-hand for Sophia's college graduation. If my daughter was getting engaged, I needed to understand why I was being excluded. The Grandview Estate sat on the outskirts of Millfield, a sprawling venue with manicured gardens and a circular driveway lined with imported stone. I'd driven past it many times, but never imagined I'd have reason to visit. The parking lot was filled with luxury cars, BMWs, Mercedes, a few vehicles I couldn't even identify. My 12-year-old Toyota Camry looked pathetically out of place. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main ballroom, I could see the party in full swing. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over guests in evening wear, holding champagne flutes and engaging in animated conversation. The scene looked like something from a magazine spread, elegant, expensive, and utterly foreign to the world where I raised my daughter. I spotted Sophia almost immediately. She wore a stunning burgundy gown that hugged her figure perfectly, her auburn hair styled in an elaborate updo adorned with what looked like genuine pearls. She looked beautiful, radiant even, but there was something in her posture that seemed forced, like she was performing rather than celebrating. I took a deep breath and approached the entrance. The hostess, a young woman with a tablet and a professional smile, intercepted me immediately. "Good evening, ma'am. Are you here for the Brennan-Sinclair engagement party?" "I am. Eleanor Brennan. I'm the bride's mother." Her smile flickered uncertainly. She consulted her tablet, scrolling through what I assumed was a guest list. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Brennan, but I don't see your name registered." Before I could respond, Sophia appeared at my side. Up close, I could see the strain around her eyes, despite her carefully applied makeup. "Mom." Her voice was tight, controlled. "What are you doing here?" "Celebrating my daughter's engagement," I said, trying to keep my tone warm, despite the growing knot in my stomach. "Congratulating you and meeting Alexander's family properly." Sophia glanced nervously back toward the ballroom, where I could see an elegant older couple watching our exchange with obvious concern. Alexander's parents, presumably. "I told you this wasn't a good time," Sophia said, her voice low but sharp with urgency. "We can talk about this later." "What talk about? Sophia, I'm your mother. Why wouldn't I be here?" Her jaw tightened in a way that reminded me of herself as a stubborn teenager. "Because you've made it clear you don't approve of Alexander, of our relationship, of the life I'm trying to build." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. When did I ever say I disapprove? You didn't have to say it outright. The questions about money, the comments about his family's wealth, the way you look at him like he's some kind of predator. "Sophia, that's not fair. I've barely had a chance to get to know him." "Exactly, because you've been so cold, so judgmental that he doesn't feel comfortable around you." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "Sweetheart, if I've given that impression, I'm truly sorry. I just want to understand." "Mrs. Brennan?" A new voice interrupted us. I turned to see Alexander approaching, his movements fluid and confident. Up close, his smile was dazzling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What a surprise to see you here." Sophia tensed beside me. "Alexander, I told you my mother wasn't coming." "Plans change," he said smoothly, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't pleased by this development. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm afraid this is rather awkward timing. We're about to make some important announcements to our guests." "I won't interfere," I said. "I just wanted to—" "Actually," Alexander interrupted, his smile never wavering, "I think it might be best if you left. This is a private event, and Sophia specifically requested that you not attend." The dismissal was delivered so politely, so smoothly, that it took me a moment to process the underlying cruelty of it. I looked at my daughter, searching her face for some sign of the warm, compassionate girl I'd raised. "Sophia, is this really what you want?" For a moment, her mask slipped. I saw uncertainty, maybe even pain, flash across her features. But then Alexander's hand tightened on her arm, and her expression hardened again. "Yes, Mom. I think you should go." I nodded, feeling something inside me break. "If that's what you want." I turned to leave, but a voice called out behind me. "Eleanor? Eleanor Brennan?" I turned to see a woman in her 50s, approaching, elegant in a simple black dress with graying hair pulled back in a sophisticated chignon. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "Margaret Walsh. I'm the event coordinator here at Grandview. I handled your daughter's booking for tonight's event." Sophia's face went pale. "Mrs. Walsh, I think there's been some confusion." "Oh, no confusion at all. I remember our conversations quite clearly, especially when you mentioned that your mother would be handling the final payment since she was so excited about the engagement." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I stared at Sophia, understanding beginning to dawn. "What final payment?" I asked slowly. Margaret looked confused now, sensing the tension but not understanding it. "For tonight's event, of course. The balance on the venue rental, catering, florals, it comes to $18,000. When Miss Brennan booked the party, she said you'd arranged financing and would settle the account tonight." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Sophia, what is she talking about?" My daughter looked trapped, her eyes darting between me, Alexander, and Margaret. "Mom, I can explain." "Explain what? That you've been planning to stick me with an $18,000 bill for a party you banned me from attending?" Alexander stepped forward, his charming mask finally slipping. "Mrs. Brennan, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Has there? And what exactly do you understand about this situation, Alexander?" For the first time since I'd met him, he looked uncomfortable. "Sophia handles her own financial arrangements. I wouldn't presume to interfere." "But you're comfortable letting her commit her mother to thousands of dollars in debt?" "Mom, please," Sophia said, her voice cracking. "Can we discuss this privately?" "I think we're past private discussions," I said, aware that other guests were beginning to notice our exchange. "Sophia, how exactly did you plan to pay for this party?" Margaret, clearly regretting that she'd spoken up, tried to intervene. "Perhaps we could settle this in my office." "No," I said firmly. "I think everyone here deserves to understand exactly what's happening." I looked directly at Alexander. "What do you do for work, Alexander?" He straightened, regaining some of his composure. "I'm in financial consulting, investment management."
"For which firm?" A pause. Too long. "I'm an independent consultant." "I see. And Sophia, you're still teaching at Riverside Elementary?" "Yes, but Mom, so you're planning to pay for this $18,000 party on a teacher's salary? Along with that designer dress, the jewelry, the new car I noticed in the parking lot?" Sophia's composure was cracking. "Alexander has been helping me." "Helping you how? With loans? Gifts?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Brennan, I don't appreciate your implications." "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking direct questions." I turned back to Margaret. "When exactly was this booking made?" "About 6 weeks ago," Margaret replied, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. "And the payment arrangement?" "Miss Brennan provided a deposit of $3,000 and said her mother would handle the balance tonight." I felt sick. "Sophia, where did you get $3,000 for a deposit?" My daughter's silence was answer enough. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, something I'd been avoiding for weeks because money was tight, and I didn't want to stress about every expenditure. What I saw made my hands shake. My savings account, which should have had about $4,200, showed a balance of $847. My credit card, which I kept for emergencies only, had a balance of $3,150. I never used that card. "Sophia," I said, my voice barely controlled, "have you been accessing my accounts?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Around us, other guests had stopped their conversations and were openly staring now. I could see Alexander's parents approaching, their faces concerned. "Sophia, I can explain everything." she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I was going to pay it back before you noticed. Pay it back with what money? Alexander said. She stopped, abruptly, glancing at her fiancé with something that looked like fear. Alexander said what? I pressed. For the first time, Alexander looked genuinely angry. Sophia, don't. But something in my daughter's expression had shifted. The fear was still there, but now there was something else. Resolution, maybe, or recognition that she'd reached a point of no return. He said that after we were married, he'd have access to better investment opportunities, that he could turn my debt into profit. What debt? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer would destroy me. Sophia looked around the room, at all the faces watching our family drama unfold in real time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. I've been using my mother's identity to fund our lifestyle. Alexander knew about it. He encouraged it. He said it was just temporary until we could establish ourselves properly. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Alexander's face cycle through several emotions, surprise that Sophia had confessed, anger at being exposed, and finally, cold calculation. Sophia, you're overwrought. You're saying things you don't mean. No, she said, and for the first time in months, she sounded like my daughter again. I'm saying things I should have said months ago. She turned to face the room full of guests, many of whom were now taking out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a spectacular public meltdown. Ladies and gentlemen, Sophia said, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom, I need to apologize to all of you. This entire engagement is based on fraud. I've been stealing money from my mother to fund a lifestyle I couldn't afford, and my fiancé not only knew about it, but encouraged it.
The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps, murmurs, the sound of people calling for someone to do something. But what struck me most was the look on Alexander's face. Not shame or remorse, but pure, calculating fury. Sophia, you're making a terrible mistake, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea what you're giving up. I'm giving up a lie, she replied. I'm giving up a relationship built on theft and deception. You're giving up your only chance at a real life. Without me, you'll go back to being nothing, a pathetic teacher in a pathetic apartment, just like your pathetic mother. The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. But they also did something else. They showed everyone in that room exactly who Alexander really was. Sophia straightened her shoulders. If that's what I am without you, then I'd rather be nothing. She reached up and removed the engagement ring from her finger, a ring I now realized had been purchased with stolen money. She held it out to Alexander. I can't marry you. I won't marry you. Alexander stared at the ring for a moment, then at Sophia, then at the room full of people watching his humiliation. When he finally spoke, his voice was ice cold. You'll regret this, Sophia. Both of you will regret this. He turned and walked toward the exit, his parents trailing behind him with mortified expressions. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back. The money's already spent. The debt is already there. Breaking up with me won't make it go away. Then he was gone, leaving behind a room full of shocked guests and two women, mother and daughter, staring at the wreckage of their lives. Margaret Walsh cleared her throat awkwardly. About the payment for tonight's event? I looked around the ballroom at the beautiful decorations, the expensive food, the horrified faces of people I didn't know. Then I looked at my daughter, who was crying now, the makeup she'd so carefully applied running down her cheeks. "Bill me," I said. "Add it to the rest." As the guests began to file out, some looking scandalized, others sympathetic, Sophia and I were left standing alone in the elegant ballroom that had cost more than I made in 6 months. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to rage at her for betraying my trust, for stealing from me, for destroying both our financial futures. But looking at her, really looking at her, I saw something I'd missed before. She looked exhausted, haunted, like someone who'd been carrying a terrible weight for months. "How did this start?" I asked quietly. "I met him at a conference for teachers. He was the keynote speaker, talking about financial literacy and investment opportunities. He was so confident, so successful. When he asked me to dinner, I couldn't believe someone like him would be interested in someone like me." "Someone like you?" "You know what I mean, Mom. A single teacher from Willowbrook, living paycheck to paycheck, driving a 10-year-old car. Alexander made me feel like I could be more than that." "And the stealing?" Her voice broke. "It started small. He said I needed better clothes to fit into his world, so I used your credit card to buy a dress. Just one dress. But then it was shoes, jewelry, dinners at expensive restaurants. He said it was an investment in our future, that once we were married and he can include me in his business ventures, I'd be able to pay you back with interest." "Sophia, I never cared about the clothes or the car or any of that." "I know, but he did. And I wanted so badly to be the woman he thought I could become that I lost sight of who I actually was." I reached out and took her hand. "Who are you, sweetheart?" She looked around the ballroom, at the remnants of her false life scattered across expensive tables. "I'm a teacher who loves her job. I'm a daughter who betrayed my mother's trust. I'm a woman who almost married a man who saw her as a mark instead of a person." She squeezed my hand. "And I'm someone who needs to figure out how to make this right." I nodded. "We'll figure it out together." But even as I said the words, I knew that Alexander's parting shot had been accurate. The money was spent, the debt was real, and breaking up with him wouldn't make it go away. In fact, as I would soon discover, our problems were just beginning. Because that night, as we sat in my small apartment going through credit card statements and loan documents, we found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden among the financial papers Sophia had brought from Alexander's apartment was a manila folder labeled E. Brennan, Phase 2. Inside were photocopies of legal documents I'd never seen before, a power of attorney form with my forged signature, mortgage refinancing papers for my apartment, and a life insurance policy in my name with Alexander Sinclair listed as the beneficiary. As I stared at these documents, one thought echoed through my mind. How many other women had there been? How many other mothers and daughters had Alexander targeted with his charm and his promises of a better life? And more importantly, what was he planning to do now that his scheme with Sophia was exposed? My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This isn't over, Mrs. Brennan. You have no idea what you've cost me." I screenshot the message and showed it to Sophia. Her face went white. "Mom, we need to call the police." "Yes," I said, already reaching for my phone. "We do." But as I dialed 911, I couldn't shake the feeling that involving the authorities would only escalate whatever game Alexander had been playing. The documents in the folder suggested he'd been planning something much more permanent than financial fraud. The thought that followed was almost too terrible to consider. If Sophia and I hadn't exposed him tonight, would I have lived to see Christmas? That question would haunt me for weeks to come. But first, we had to survive whatever Alexander had planned next. Because men like him don't just walk away when their schemes fall apart. They double down. And I was about to learn exactly what that meant. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report financial fraud and identity theft, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And I think my life might be in danger. And that's where part one of this story ends. Not with a happy reconciliation or a simple misunderstanding, but with the horrifying realization that my daughter and I had stumbled into something much more dangerous than financial fraud. We'd exposed a predator, and predators don't forgive or forget. They hunt. The 911 call that night changed everything. Within an hour, my small apartment on Elm Street had become a crime scene processing center. Detective Maria Santos arrived first, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd seen enough fraud cases to fill several lifetimes. Behind her came Officer James Chen, a younger man with a tablet and evidence bags, ready to document what would become one of the most complex identity theft cases Millfield had seen in years. "Mrs. Brennan," Detective Santos said, settling into my worn armchair while Sophia and I huddled together on the couch. "I need you to walk me through everything from the beginning. When did you first notice unusual activity on your accounts?" I told her about the banking app discovery, the credit card charges I'd never made, the loans I'd never applied for. Sophia sat beside me, occasionally adding details, her voice growing stronger as she confessed the full scope of her betrayal. But it was when I showed Detective Santos the manila folder labeled E. Brennan Phase 2 that her expression shifted from professional concern to something much more serious. "These documents," she said, examining the forged power of attorney and life insurance papers, "suggest this goes beyond simple identity theft. Mr. Sinclair was planning something much more comprehensive." Officer Chen looked up from his tablet. "The life insurance policy alone is worth $250,000. With him as the beneficiary and a forged power of attorney, he could have had significant control over my assets and decisions." Sophia's face went white. "You think he was planning to hurt my mother?" Detective Santos didn't answer directly. "I think Mr. Sinclair had contingency plans that went far beyond marrying you for financial gain. These documents suggest he was building a legal framework that would benefit him regardless of whether the marriage happened." She turned to me. "Mrs. Brennan, have you experienced any unusual incidents lately? Accidents? Near misses? Anything that could have been staged to look like accidental?" My mind flashed back through the past few months. "There was a gas leak in my building 6 weeks ago. Everyone had to evacuate for 3 days. The fire department said it was probably a faulty connection, but they never found the exact source." "What about your car?" "My brakes started making noise about a month ago. I had them checked, and the mechanic said the brake lines showed unusual wear, like they'd been tampered with." The words felt surreal as I spoke them. "But he said that it could have been normal deterioration." Detective Santos and Officer Chen exchanged a look that made my stomach clench. "We're going to need to examine your vehicle," Detective Santos said, "and we'll want to coordinate with the fire department about that gas leak." Over the next 3 hours, they documented everything: the financial fraud, the forged documents, the threatening text message, and what was beginning to look like a pattern of attempted harm disguised as accidents. When they finally left at 2 a.m., they took boxes of evidence and left us with a victim's advocate contact card and strict instructions to call immediately if Alexander made any attempt to contact us. Sophia and I sat in the aftermath, surrounded by the debris of our financial documents spread across my small dining table. The numbers were devastating. $47,000 in fraudulent debt, plus the $18,000 for the engagement party I was now legally responsible for. My savings wiped out, my credit destroyed, and my small apartment potentially at risk if I couldn't make the mounting payments. "Sophia, Mom, how are we going to fix this?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her for the first time in months. Without the expensive makeup and designer clothes, she looked young, scared, and heartbreakingly like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "We'll start by you moving back home," I said. We'll consolidate our resources, cut every unnecessary expense, and work with the credit card companies to set up payment plans. But what about your retirement, your savings? I was 72 years old. My retirement savings were gone, my credit was ruined, and I was facing debt that would take years to repay on my fixed income. The life I'd carefully planned for my golden years had evaporated in a single evening. But Alexander wasn't done with us. The harassment started 2 days later. Phone calls at all hours from blocked numbers, breathing but no voice, packages delivered to my apartment containing photos of me grocery shopping, walking to my car, sitting by my window. Each package came with the same message: "You cost me everything. Now I'll cost you everything." Detective Santos increased patrol coverage around my building and helped us file for a restraining order, but Alexander was careful to stay just within legal boundaries. The photos were taken from public spaces, the calls couldn't be definitively traced to him, and the messages, while threatening, stopped short of explicit death threats. "He's escalating," Detective Santos warned during one of her visits. "Men like Sinclair don't just walk away when their schemes collapse. They view exposure as a personal attack that requires retaliation." The financial investigation was revealing even more disturbing patterns. Alexander had targeted at least 3 other women in surrounding counties over the past 5 years, each time using a similar approach: charm, romance, gradual financial manipulation, then escalation to more serious fraud. In 2 cases, the women had died in what appeared to be accidents before the fraud was discovered. "We're reopening those cases," Detective Santos told us. "The pattern is too consistent to ignore." But it was Sophia who uncovered the detail that finally gave police the evidence they needed to arrest him. She'd been going through old text messages on her phone, trying to provide a complete timeline for the investigation, when she found something she'd forgotten about: a photo Alexander had sent her months earlier, what she'd thought was just a casual selfie of him in his apartment. But in the background of the image, clearly visible on his desk, were documents with another woman's name and personal information. "Look at this," Sophia said, showing me the photo on her phone. "That's not my paperwork on his desk. Whose social security card is that?" Detective Santos ran the information and discovered that the woman, Patricia Fleming, had died in a car accident 8 months earlier, an accident that occurred just 2 weeks after she'd reportedly broken up with a man named Alexander Sinclair. "This is the break we needed," Detective Santos said grimly. "We can connect him directly to multiple victims now." The arrest happened at dawn on a Wednesday. Alexander had been staying at an extended-stay hotel outside the city, apparently planning his next move. When police searched his room, they found detailed files on 6 different women, including Sophia and me. Each file contained personal information, financial records, and what appeared to be surveillance notes. My file was the thickest: notes about my daily routine, my health conditions, my financial vulnerabilities. There were even detailed plans for staging various accidents that would allow him to collect on the life insurance policy he'd fraudulently obtained. But perhaps most chilling were the handwritten notes in the margins. Target shows strong maternal protective instincts, threatened daughter to ensure compliance, isolated elderly woman with limited family support system, ideal candidate for long-term asset extraction. I wasn't a person to Alexander Sinclair. I was a business plan. The trial began 6 months later. By then, Sophia had moved back in with me, taken a second job tutoring students after school, and we'd begun the long process of rebuilding our financial lives. The debt was still crushing, but we were managing it one payment at a time. Alexander's defense attorney tried to paint him as a misunderstood entrepreneur whose romantic relationships had been misconstrued as fraud. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forged documents, the surveillance photos, the detailed victim files, and testimony from survivors of his previous schemes painted a clear picture of a sophisticated predator who had turned romance scams into an art form. The most powerful testimony came from Patricia Fleming's sister, who had always suspected her sister's death wasn't accidental. Patricia had called her the night before she died, saying that she'd discovered her boyfriend had been stealing from her and that she was going to the police in the morning. She never got the chance. "He didn't just steal money," Patricia's sister said from the witness stand. "He stole my sister's life, her trust, her future, and he would have done the same to others if he hadn't been stopped. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at Alexander as I spoke. He sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, still handsome, still projecting the charm that had fooled so many women. But his eyes were cold, calculating, completely devoid of the warmth he'd shown Sophia during their courtship. Mr. Sinclair didn't just commit financial fraud. He weaponized my daughter's love, her desire to improve her life, her natural trust in someone she believed cared about her. He turned her into an unwitting accomplice in her own mother's victimization. I paused, gathering my thoughts. But worse than the money he stole was the relationship he poisoned. He created mistrust between my daughter and me, made us suspicious of each other's motives, and nearly destroyed the most important connection in both our lives. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. Multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, forgery, stalking, and conspiracy to commit murder in the Patricia Fleming case. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15 years. As they led him away, Alexander turned to look at Sophia and me one final time. His expression was pure hatred, but there was something else there too. Calculation. Even now, even facing decades in prison, he was already planning something. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently.
Detective Santos met us outside the courthouse. He'll appeal, of course, and you should know that men like Sinclair often have contacts on the outside, people who might be willing to continue harassment campaigns even while they're incarcerated. She handed me a card. "This is a victim's advocate who specializes in long-term protection. I'd recommend staying in touch with her." As for me, I went back to work part-time as a substitute teacher at 74 years old. The income helped, but more importantly, it reminded me that I still had value, still had something to contribute. The students didn't care about my credit score or my age. They just needed someone who could help them learn. We moved to a new apartment across town, partially for financial reasons, but mostly for security. Our old building held too many memories of surveillance and fear. The new place is smaller but brighter, with better locks and a security system that Detective Santos helped us choose. The threat from Alexander hasn't disappeared entirely. We still get occasional anonymous letters forwarded through his prison, always carefully worded to avoid direct threats, but clearly intended to remind us that he hasn't forgotten. The victim's advocate warned us that this might continue for years. But we're not the same women who walked into that engagement party 3 years ago. Sophia's stronger, more confident, more aware of her own worth. She's learned that she doesn't need expensive clothes or exclusive venues to be valuable. She's learned that real love doesn't require you to compromise your integrity or betray the people who truly care about you. And I've learned that strength isn't about avoiding victimization. It's about how you respond when someone tries to destroy you. The other victims of Alexander's schemes have stayed in touch. We formed an informal support group, sharing resources for identity theft recovery and emotional healing. 2 of the women have testified before state legislators about the need for stronger penalties for romance scams. Patricia Fleming's sister started a foundation to help elderly victims of financial fraud. Evil doesn't just create individual victims. It creates communities of survivors who refuse to let predators win. That evening, Sophia and I sat on the small balcony of our new apartment, sharing a bottle of wine that cost $12 and tasted like victory. The sun was setting over Millfield, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that didn't cost anything to enjoy. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't confessed that night?" Sophia asked. I considered the question. The forged life insurance policy, the suspicious accidents, the detailed plans found in Alexander's hotel room. I think one way or another, the truth would have come out, but it might have been too late for one or both of us. I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it. For believing him, for stealing from you, for putting us both in danger. I reached over and took her hand. You were targeted by a professional predator, sweetheart. Someone who had perfected his techniques on multiple victims. The fact that you found the strength to tell the truth when it mattered most, That's what I choose to focus on. We sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Tomorrow, Sophia would go to her job that she loved, working with children who needed her guidance. I would continue my volunteer work with the Fraud Victims Advocacy Group, helping other women navigate the complex process of identity theft recovery. The phone rang inside the apartment. For a moment, both Sophia and I tensed, old habits from the months of harassment. But it was just David calling to confirm dinner plans for the weekend. Normal, healthy, honest communication from someone who cared about Sophia for who she really was. As I listened to my daughter laugh at something David said, I realized that this was what victory looked like. Not a dramatic courtroom scene or a moment of perfect revenge, but the simple ability to answer your phone without fear, to plan for the future with confidence, and to trust that the people who say they love you actually mean it. Alexander Sinclair had tried to destroy our lives, but in the end, he'd only made us stronger. The relationship between Sophia and I had been tested by fire and emerged unbreakable. We knew now that we could survive anything as long as we faced it together. That night, as I prepared for bed in our secure apartment, I thought about the manila folder that had started this whole investigation. E. Brennan, Phase 2, it had read. Alexander's plan for the systematic destruction of my life and the theft of everything I'd worked for. But he'd miscalculated one crucial factor, the power of a mother's love and a daughter's courage to do the right thing, even when it meant admitting terrible mistakes. Phase 2 was his plan. Our recovery, our strength, our rebuilt lives, that was Phase 3. And unlike his scheme built on lies and manipulation, ours was built on truth, forgiveness, and the kind of love that can't be stolen or destroyed. We'd won. Thank you for joining me on this journey of betrayal, discovery, and ultimately healing. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you or someone you know ever been targeted by a romance scam? Your story could help others recognize the warning signs. Remember, real love doesn't require you to betray your family, compromise your integrity, or live beyond your means. Real love accepts you as you are and helps you become the best version of yourself, not someone else's version of who you should be. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and never forget that it's never too late to tell the truth. Until next time.